50 Years in the Church of Rome, Chapter 38. The battle fought and gained at the Grand Dinner of Quebec Seminary by the Society of Temperance had been decisive. The triumph was complete as it was glorious. Hereafter, her march to the conquest of Canada was to be a triumph. Her banners were soon to be planted over all the cities and towns and villages of my dear country. To commemorate the expression of their joy and gratitude to God to the remotest generations, the people of Beauport erected the beautiful column of temperance, which is still seen halfway between Quebec and Montmorency Falls. The Bishop de Nancy, my Lord Forbien Jensen, blessed that first monument of the temperance. September 7th, 1841, in the midst of an immense multitude of people, the parishes of St. Peter, St. John, St. Famille, Orleans Island, with St. Michael were the first after Langardien, Chateau Richer, St. Anne, St. Joachim, to request me to preach on temperance. Soon after, the whole population of St. Roch, Canada, Quebec, took the pledge with a wonderful unanimity, and kept it long with marvelous fidelity, in order to show to the whole country their feelings of gratitude. They presented me with a fine picture of the column of temperance, and a complimentary address written and delivered by one of the most promising young men of Quebec, Mr. John Cachon, who was raised some years later to the dignity of a cabinet minister, and who has been the worthy lieutenant governor of Manitoba. That address was soon followed by another from the citizens of Quebec and Beauport, presented along with my portrait by Mr. Joseph Parent, then editor of the Canadian and afterwards provincial secretary of Canada. What a strange being man is! How fickle are his judgments! In 1842 they had no words sufficiently flattering to praise the very man in the face of whom they were spitting in 1838 for doing the very same thing. Was I better for establishing the Society of Temperance in 1842 than I was in establishing it in 1838? No, I was worse then, when in 1838 bishops, priests, and people were abusing, slandering, giving me a bad name for raising the banners of temperance over my country, than I was in continuing to lift it up in 1842. No, the sudden and complete judgments of men in such a short period of time had the good and providential effect of filling my mind with the most supreme indifference, not to say contempt, for what men thought or said of me. Yes, this sudden passage from condemnation to that of praise, when I was doing the very same work, had the good effect to cure me of that natural pride which one is apt to feel when publicly applauded by men. It is to that knowledge acquired when young, that I owe the preservation of my dignity as a man and a priest. When all my bishops and their priests were arrayed against me at the dining table of the Seminary of Quebec, it is that knowledge also that taught me not to forget that I was nothing but a worm of the dust and an unprofitable servant of God. When the same men overwhelmed me with their unmerited praises, let not my readers think, however, that I was absolutely indifferent to this change and charge of public feeling, for no words can tell the joy I felt at the assurance which these public manifestations afforded me that the cause of temperance was to triumph everywhere in my country. Let me tell here a fact too honorable to the people of Beauport to be omitted. As soon as the demon of intemperance was driven from my parish, I felt that my first duty was to give my attention to education, which had been so shamefully neglected by my predecessors that there was not a single school in that parish worthy of the name. I proposed my plan to the people, asked their cooperation, and set to work without delay. I began by erecting a fine stone schoolhouse near the church, on the site of the old parsonages. The old walls were pulled down, and on the old foundation a good structure was soon erected, with the free collections raised in the village. But the work had hardly half finished when I found myself without a cent to carry on. I saw at once that, having no idea of the value of education, the people would murmur at my asking any more money. I therefore sold my horse, a fine animal given to me by a rich uncle, and with the money finished the building. My people felt humiliated and pained at seeing their pastor obliged to walk when going to Quebec or visiting the sick. They said to each other, "Is it not a shame, a burning shame, for us to have to force our young curate to sell his fine horse to build our schoolhouses, when it would have been so easy to do that work ourselves? Let us repair our faults." On my return from establishing the Society of Temperance in St. John 2 weeks later, my servant man said to me, "Please, Mr. Le Curate, come to the stable and see a very curious thing." "Well, what curious thing can there be?" I asked. "Well, sir, please come and you will see." What was both my surprise and pleasure to find one of the most splendid Canadian horses there as mine. My servant said to me, "During your absence, the people have raised $500 and bought this fine horse for you. They say they do not want any longer to see their curate walking in the mud. When they drove the horse here, that I might present him to you as a surprise on your arrival, I heard them say that with the Temperance Society you have saved them more than $500 every week in money, time, and health, and that it was only an act of justice to give you the savings of a week." The only way of expressing my gratitude to my noble people was to redouble my exertions in securing the benefits of a good education to their children. I soon proposed to the people to build another schoolhouse 2 miles distant from the first. But I was not long without seeing that this new enterprise was to be still more uphill work than the first one among the people, of whom hardly 1 in 50 could sign his name. "Have not our fathers done well without those costly schools?" said many. "What is the use in expending so much money for a thing that does not add a day to our existence, nor an atom to our comfort?" I soon felt confronted by such a deadly interference, not to say opposition, on the best of my farmers, that I feared for a few days lest I had really gone too far. The last cent of my revenues was not only given, but a little personal debt created to meet the payments, and a round sum of $500 had to be found to finish the work. I visited the richest man of Beauport to ask him to come to my rescue. 40 years before, he had come to Beauport, barefooted, without a cent to work. He had employed his first earned dollars in purchasing some rum, which he had doubled his money in 2 hours, and had continued to double his money at that rate in the same way till he was worth nearly $200,000. He then stopped selling rum to invest his money in city properties. He answered me, "My dear Mr. Curate, I would have no objection to giving you the $500 you want, if I had not met the Grand Vicar de Mars yesterday, who warned me, as an old friend, against what he calls your dangerous and exaggerated views in reference to education of the people. He advised me, for your own good and the good of people, to do all in my power to induce you to desist from your plan of covering our parishes with schools." "Will you allow me," I answered, "to mention our conversation to Mr. Demars, and tell him what you have just said about his advising you to oppose me in my efforts to promote the interest of education?" "Yes, sir, by all means," answered Mr. Des Rousseau. "I allow you to repeat to the venerable superior of the Seminary of Quebec what he said to me yesterday. It was not a secret, for there were several other farmers of Beauport to whom he said the very same thing. If you will ignore that the priests of Quebec are opposed to your plans of educating our children, you must be only one who does not know it, for it is a public fact. Your difficulties in raising the funds you want come only from opposition of the rest of the clergy to you in this matter. We have plenty of money in Beauport today, and we would feel happy to help you, but you understand that our good will be somewhat cooled by the opposition of men whom we are accustomed to respect." I replied, "Do you not remember, my dear Mr. Des Roussel, that those very same opposed me in the same way in my very first efforts to establish the temperance society in your midst?" "Well, yes, sir," he answered with a smile. "We remember it well, but you have converted them to your views now." "Oh, my dear sir, I hope we shall convert them also in this question of education." The very next day morning I was knocking at the door of the Reverend Grand Vicar de Mars, after I had tied my splendid horse in the courtyard of the Seminary of Quebec. I was received with the utmost marks of courtesy. Without losing any time, I repeated to the old superior what Mr. Des Rousseau had told me of his opposition to my educational plans, and respectfully asked him if it were true. The poor Grand Vicar seemed as if thunderstruck by my abrupt, though polite, question. At first he tried to explain what he had said by taking a long circuit, but I mercilessly brought him to the point at issue and forced him to say, "Yes, I said that." I then rejoined, "Mr. Grand Vicar, I am only a child before you when comparing my age with yours. However, I have the honor to be the curate of Beauport. It is in that capacity that I respectfully ask you, by what right you oppose my plans for educating our children?" "I hope, Mr. Chinquay," he answered, "you do not mean to say that I am the enemy of education, for I would answer you that this is the first house of education on this continent, and that I was at the head of it before you were born. I hope that I have the right to believe and say that the old superior of the seminary at Quebec understands, as well as the young curate of Beauport, the advantage of a good education, but I will repeat to you what I said to Mr. Desrousseaux, that it is a great mistake to introduce such a system of education as you want to do in Beauport. Let every parish have its well-educated notary, doctor, merchants, and a few others to do public business. That is enough. Our parishes of Canada are models of peace and harmony under the direction of their good curates, but they will become unmanageable the very day your system of education spreads abroad. For when all the bad propensities of the heart will be developed with an irresistible force. Besides, you know that since the conquest of Canada by the Protestant England, the Protestants are waiting for their opportunity to spread their Bible among our people. The only barrier we can oppose to that danger is to have in future, as in the past, only a very limited number of our people who can read or write. For as soon as the common people are able to read, they will, like Adam and Eve, taste the forbidden fruit. They will read the Bible, turn Protestants, and be lost for time and eternity. In my answer, among other things, I said, go into the country. Look at the farm, which is well cultivated, plowed with attention and skill, richly manured and sown with good seed. Is it not infinitely more pleasant and beautiful to live on such a farm than on one which is neglected, unskillfully managed, and covered with noxious weeds? While the difference between a well-educated and an uneducated people is still greater in my mind, I know that the priests of Canada in general have your views, and it is for that reason that the parish of Beauport, with its immense revenues, had been left without a school worthy of the name, from its foundation to my going there. But my views are absolutely different, and as for your fear of the Bible, I confess we are antipodes to each other. I consider that one of the greatest blessings God has bestowed upon me is that I have read the Bible when I was on my mother's knees. I do not even conceal from you that one of my objects in giving a good education to every boy and girl of Beauport is to put the gospel of Christ in their hands as soon as they are able to read it. At the end of our conversation, which was very excited on both sides, though kept in the bounds of politeness, during nearly 2 hours, I said, Mr. Grand Vicar, I did not come here to convert you to my views. This would have been an impertinence on my part, nor can you convert me to yours, if you are trying it, for you know I have a bad reputation of being a hard case. I came here to ask you a favor, to let me work according to my conscience in a parish which is mine and not yours. Do not interfere any more in my affairs between me and my parishioners than you would like me to interfere in the management of your seminary. As you would not like me to criticize you before your pupils and turn you into ridicule, please cease adding to my difficulties among my people by continuing in the future what you have done in the past. You know, Mr. Grand Vicar, that I have always respected you as my father. You have many times been my adviser and confessor and my friend. I hope you will grant me the favor I ask from you in the name of our common Savior, for it is the spiritual and temporal good of our people and pastor of Beauport, that I make this prayer. That old priest was a kind-hearted man. These last words melted his heart. He promised what I wanted, and we parted from each other on better terms than I had expected at first. When we, crossing the courtyard of the seminary, I saw Archbishop Signet, who, coming from taking a ride, had stopped to look at my horse and admire it. When near him, I said, "My lordship, this is a bishop's horse, and ought to be in your hands." "It is what I was saying to my secretary," replied the bishop. "How long is it since you got it?" "Only a few days, my lord." "Have you any intention of selling it?" "I would, if it would please my bishop," I replied. "What is the price?" asked the bishop. "Those who gave it to me paid $500 for it," I replied. Oh, that is too dear," rejoined the bishop. "With $500 we can get 5 good horses. 200 will be enough." "Your lordship is joking. Whereas rich as I am poor, $1,000 would not take that noble animal from my hands, except to have it put in a carouse of my bishop." "Go and write a check of $200 to the order of Mr. Chinque," said the bishop to his secretary, Mr. Bellels. When the secretary had gone to write the check, the bishop, being alone with me, took from his portfolio 3 bank bills of $100 each and put them into my hand. "This will make up your $500 when my secretary gives you the check. But please say nothing to anybody, not even to my secretary. I do not like to have my private affairs talked about around the corners of the street. That horse is the most splendid I ever saw, and I am much obliged to you for having sold it to me." I was also very happy to have $500 in hand, for with 300 I could finish my schoolhouse, and there was 200 more to begin another 3 miles distance. Just 2 weeks later, when I was dressing myself at sunrise, my servant came to my room and said, there are 20 men on horseback who want to speak to you." 20 men on horseback who want to speak to me, I answered. "Are you dreaming?" "I am not dreaming," answered the young man. "There they are at the door, on horseback, waiting for you." As soon as I dressed, and in the presence of 20 of my best farmers on horseback, who had formed themselves in a half circle to receive me. "What do you want, my friends?" I asked. One of them, who had studied a few years in the seminary of Quebec, answered, "Dear pastor, we come in the name of the whole people of Beauport to ask your pardon for having saddened your heart by not coming as we ought to help in the superhuman efforts you have made to give good schools to our children. This is the result of our ignorance, having never gone to schools ourselves. The greater part of us have never known the value of education, but the heroic sacrifices you have made lately have opened our eyes. They ought to have been opened at the sale of your first horse, but we were in need of another lesson to understand our meanness. However, the selling of the second horse has done more than anything else to awaken us from our shameful lethargy. The fear of receiving a new rebuke from us if you made another appeal to our generosity has forced you to make that new sacrifice. The first news came to us as a thunderbolt, but there is always some light in a thunderbolt. though that light we have seen our profound degradation and shutting our ears to your earnest and paternal appeals in favor of our own dear children. Be sure, dear pastor, that we are shamed of our conduct. From this day, not only our hearts, but our purses are yours, in all you want to do to secure a good education for our families. However, our principal object in coming here today is not to say vain words, but to do an act of reparation and justice. Our first thought, when we heard that you had sold the horse we had given you, was to present you with another. We have been prevented from doing this by a certainty that you would sell it again, either to help some poor people to build another schoolhouse, as we cannot bear to see our pastor walking in the mud when going to the city or visiting us. We have determined to put another horse in your hands, but in such a way that you will not have the right to sell it. We ask you then a favor, to select the best horse here among these 20 which are before you, and to keep it as long as you remain in our midst. We hope it will be very long. It will be a return to its present owner if you leave us, and be sure, dear pastor, that one of us who leaves his horse in your hands will be the most happy and proudest of all. When speaking thus, that noble man had several times been unable to conceal the tears which were rolling down his cheeks, and more than once his trembling voice had been choked by emotion. I tried in vain at first to speak. My feelings of gratitude and admiration could be expressed only with my tears. It took some time before I could utter a single word. At last I said, "My dear friends, this is too much for your poor pastor. I feel overwhelmed by this grand act of kindness. I do not say that I thank you. The word thank is too small, too short and insignificant to tell you what your poor unworthy pastor feels, at what his eyes see and his ears hear just now. The great and merciful God, who has put those sentiments into your hearts, alone can repay you for the joy which will fill my soul. I would hurt your feelings, I know, by not accepting your offering. I accept it. But to punish your speaker, Mr. Parent, for his complimentary address, I will take his horse for the time I am cured at Beauport, which I hope will be till I die." And I laid my hand on the bridle of the splendid animal. There was then a struggle which I had not expected. Every one of the 19 whom I left with their horses began to cry, "Oh, do not take that horse. It is not worth a penny. Mine is much stronger," said one. "Mine is faster," cried another. "Mine is a safer ride," said a third. Every one wanted me to take his horse and tried to persuade me that it was the best of all. They really felt sorry that they were not able to change my mind. Has anyone ever felt more happy than I was in the midst of those generous friends? The memory of that happy hour will never pass away from my mind. The end of chapter 38, 50 Years in the Church of Rome.